Hello, this is Clarence Moye with the Words Daily here with Wyatt Russell, the co-star of FX's Under the Banner of Heaven, where he plays Dan Lafferty. Wyatt, it's very nice to meet you.
Nice to meet you too.
This time last year, you were in Falcon and the Winter Soldier, starring as John Walker, a tremendous performance that, in my opinion, should have been Emmy nominated. And now you've got another limited series in Under the Banner of Heaven. It's been a big year.
Yeah, it has been a big year, and I had a kid and got through COVID, and
Congratulations on all of the above.
Thanks. Yeah, been a big year for everybody.
Yeah. So what is it about Under the Banner of Heaven that attracted you as an actor and the role of Dan Lafferty?
I read it, I get 9 or 10 years ago now when it came out. And it was something that, it was a story that was undeniably interesting and made you ask a lot of questions for me, of faith in general. I had always approached faith from an academic point of view. I went to Jesuit school, so it was, I was educated in a Catholic environment, but it was much more academically based than it was faith based. So I'd always been interested in, literal interpretation and actual interpretation. So it was something that, it grabbed my attention. And then when they made it into a movie, they were making a movie at Warner Brothers, that Ron was directing it. I was in no place in my career to be in it. But I'd done some research on the guys and said, I think I could play a good Dan. And I interviewed with Ron. We had a meeting and I talked with him about Alan, and it was kind of like, I didn't see myself as Alan as much, just because in that version, it was just a different version of Alan. And Dan had all of these interesting things and thoughts that, again, went back to sort of my academic understanding of the Bible and the Old Testament and the New Testament. And I'd never really studied the Book of Mormon. So it was just an interesting opportunity. Didn't make it. Years later, it came back around, had another meeting. Maybe I was in a little bit better place in my career, but still not really what they were looking for. Didn't make it. And then FX acquired it and made it into the long form. And it was so much better being told that way. They had so much more leeway and room to tell the story as it needed to be told. It's just, there's so much information. So they were able to access the story in the right way and create some characters that they needed to create for perspective. And I was at the right place in the right time in my career to be right for the role. And I spoke with Lance in New York, and we had a great meeting, and I think we saw it the same way. And so after that, it was kind of a done deal.
So, you mentioned not knowing much about the Mormon faith. How did you sort of do that research to understand where the Lafferty family was coming from in terms of these very different explorations of their faith?
There was a lot of documentaries on polygamy. There's a lot of documentaries on the Mormon faith that I watched. Did as much reading as I could, articles, YouTube videos of Dan speaking. There was a couple lengthy ones that were good to look at. There were audio recordings that I was able to get of Dan in prison speaking to somebody who wasn't an interviewer. They were just an acquaintance or somebody that, I think it was a law enforcement guy who had sort of befriended him, but it was more about how getting into the mind of a fundamentalist so that they could understand better where their minds are and how they get to the places that they get. But in those conversations, it was candid. So you could hear his kind of true self in a way. And that was very valuable to me. And then accessing it, I think throwing away all of the Mormon faith part and all of the religious part, all of that aspect of the show that was obvious and so apparent in the dialogue. It was important to just let that be the way it was, because of course it is that. Everybody knows that's what it's about. But at the core of it, it's about a family and people struggling to survive in their family within this religion, because these walls that have been erected around them create a certain create certain viewpoints that they have to follow, because if you question it, then you risk losing your family, and you risk losing that thing. So getting to the core of those elements of what it was really about was just your family, and wanting the best for your family, and what lengths will you go, and what does the best mean. And that is where they just go like that.
So taking a look at all of that research, that footage from prison, was it that family connection that really helped you understand how he ticked as an individual when you're looking at this great screenplay from Dustin Lance Black, to sort of figure out who he was as a person and how you would play him?
Yeah, that definitely. Because what I garnered from the things I was able to listen to and see from Dan was that he was so steadfast in his beliefs, and his extreme fundamentalist beliefs, that I was like, well, how do you get there? And really, I came to the conclusion that he was so afraid of losing his family. He loved his family. He had a lot of love in his heart, and all love is not created equal. That he wanted very badly to see his family in the afterlife, and he was terrified of not. And he was terrified of, I think, what the afterlife would bring, and he needed control over that. And he's a great manipulator who is a narcissist, and narcissists need control. And in order to find control, he went down this rabbit hole, because when it was presented to him, like, there's these texts, and they're original texts, and it's like, no, those were real, those were original, that was taken out. That wasn't like some crazy guy interpreting the new text in some crazy way. It's important to remember that these fundamentalists, that they're doing exactly what it says in the book. And so that's the way he found freedom, was he went down the rabbit hole, because down there anything's possible as long as you just do it this way. And that meant to him that polygamy was possible, and him being a guy who was probably a sex addict, who had to wear a pebble in his shoe to remind him that he couldn't have sex with any woman that he saw. It spoke to me as to, this guy was so terrified and so scared that he needed some sort of control over his life, and a total narcissist, and that's what led him down that extremist path.
One of the common jokes about Mormons, from stuff like South Park or Book of Mormon, is that they're super nice people. Obviously,
Yeah.
the Laffertys aren't all super nice people, but one of the things that I think you do incredibly well within this show is you have that nice guy demeanor, that persona, but with the big smile, particularly when you're coming up on Brenda toward the end of the series and visiting her house. But there's all this there's this malice underneath. I call it grinning malice.
Yeah.
How do you do that as an actor? How do you portray that internally so well?
I think that on the outside, my experience with, I've had, I played with hockey with some people who are Mormon. I've had, interactions with people that are Mormon. I've only ever had great interactions. I've never had an interaction that wasn't anything but wonderful. Right. And that there's a reality to that. Like, there's a reality to that niceness as a facade. It's still nice. It might have some sort of, angle bent on it. You can sometimes see through the eyes, where it really is, to me, always in the eyes. Like, you can see it when someone is smiling because they have to. But Dan, it was important that his joy, it wasn't fake. It wasn't fake. It was real. He knew he in his mind had to do this, and that was the way he was going to get to see them in heaven, and this was going to solve their problem. And that brought him joy. And so that's the scary, horrible part, is that it's very difficult for a lot of people to discern when someone, anybody, by the way, it could be anybody. It doesn't have to be just Mormon faith.
Right.
It's like,
Right.
Anybody that has that, everything's super good, super great, but you can see in their eyes, you're like, oh, it's not,
Yeah.
I know something's going on there. And so I think just holding on to the information that you have, and playing the scene as it needs to be played. A lot of that, again, is done by the film and the filmmaker in the process. Like it's their job to give the context to that smile. You know what I mean? It's not my job to like play it all. And so that's, again, the importance of the filmmaking, and Dustin Lance Black and Tommy Schlamme of the 7th episode, Ron Howard. They're going to make the right decisions to make that smile sinister, even though when you're doing it, that smile might actually be a real smile. So there's a lot of counting on the team to make that work.
Right. Music cues and things like that.
Yeah.
There's a key, as you look at the trajectory of Dan Lafferty over the series, there's a pivotal moment, I think, that really, in my opinion, really changes who he is. It is the scene where, after Eamon, played by Christopher Heyerdahl, has given him the sort of the rule position or the lead position when they go on their mission, comes back, it didn't go well. We'll just say it didn't go well. He whips his hands in front of the family, in front of the kids. Tell me what you think that moment did to your interpretation of Dan Lafferty from that moment on through the rest of the series, because it's a humiliating moment for anybody. Him, I suspected it's worse.
I think that, like anybody, again, this is part of connecting to the reality to it. Anybody wants their father to approve of them. It doesn't matter what your relationship with your father is. You seek approval from one of the people that brought you into the world. So I don't think there was any difference there for Dan. And that when that happened, it wasn't Dan turning to hate his father. It was Dan turning to say, well, how can I make my father love me more? And in that scene, you hear him say, these are the things that you taught us how to do. So Dan is interpreting his father's narcissism and his own father's issues that were put on Dan because his dad was doing his own version of manipulation and narcissism. And so that's the only way Dan knows how to get what he wants. So in order to be the open vessel and be the person who's going to be the one, if he's the one, then that means that, like, dad, I succeeded in dad's eyes. And the only way he knows about going about doing that is manipulate and be a narcissist. He doesn't lie. He's not a liar. He's a manipulator, and he lets other people do the deeds. He lets other people figure out what they're going to do. And honestly, part of it that I came across about halfway through, I think this is my opinion, I don't know this, but I feel like Dan half knew what he wanted and half had no clue, and just wanted to keep control of his brother, keep control of the family, keep the illusion of control. And that he had some very mentally unstable people around him, including himself in many ways. And the way that you keep control when somebody challenges your thought process, you risk losing their obedience, right? You risk losing them. If you say, I don't agree with you, well, then that can cause a chasm. Dan never does that. He only ever says, well, if that's how you feel, or should we pray on it? He'll guide you towards your own thought being right. So if you have someone who's mentally unstable and then following these guidelines of fundamentalist Mormonism that does have a very violent past, those thoughts aren't necessarily in their minds going to be wrong. So he's not going to challenge that thought. He's not going to challenge that thought as a wrong thought. He'll feed that thought and say, yeah, you know what, maybe you're right. And that keeps that person engaged, and that keeps that keeps his manipulation of that person overlording over them. And that and the symbiosis continues, you know, and the downward spiral continues. And so I think that when it got to the end, I don't think Dan had a fucking clue what was really going to happen. He was just listening to signs from the Lord. He didn't even know at the very end. It was just listening to feelings, which is the danger of just listening to your feelings and not intellectualizing something and say, wait, hold on. Like, what am I actually doing here? Let me think about this for a second. Dan would just play to everyone's emotions and allow their emotions to just be okay, even when they were fucking crazy, you know? So I think that that's where, you know, where it all ended up. That's what I really got out of Dan was that aspect of his narcissism and manipulation.
I have just one more question for you. And a lot of what drives Dan within the series is this concept of anti-government, you know, anti-taxes, anti-licensing, you know, they don't belong in your in life, they don't belong in Dan's faith, all of that. Do you think that message, you can't have missed parallels? That, I mean, you, as you were filming this, you must be able to see parallels between non-Mormons and the Mormons that are illustrated here within this series, about those similar sort of almost domestic terrorist kind of personas that can be out there. Was that a message that sort of resonated with you while you were filming it?
In certain ways, for sure. And I think that when you go back into the history books, you realize that the more things change, the more they stay the same.
Right.
That, you know, thinking that everybody one day is going to be in some kumbaya moment where, you know, everyone's going to be all happy and together and working on things in unison. Like, to me personally, I feel like that, to me, that's a utopia that doesn't exist. That's just not who we are as people. You know, you do the best that you can. Especially our country was born completely on the idea that everybody's going to have their own ideas. You do your own shit and you figure it out. Well, I mean, what's going to happen is eventually people are going to come at odds and say, I want you to live like me and I want you to live like me. And that person says, no, I don't want to do that. And then when they feel like they're being forced to live a certain way that they don't want, are going to get their backs up. It's sort of like the nature of it. And that in this scenario, it became, to me, very clear of the importance of codifying things in and what laws you're going to follow. Like, you have to be a nation of laws. You cannot mix religion and state. Like, those two things cannot go together. And our founding fathers, for all the things that people can find flaws in, that's one that I find hard finding a flaw in. It doesn't work. And so that what happened with these guys was they use this kernel of truth and kernel of understanding of like, well, why should I have to do that? And why should I have to do that? And why should I have to pay that tax? And why should I have to pay that? Looking just in a vacuum, you can look at that and go, well, yeah, that's a good question. Let's talk about that question. Or when he gets pulled over by the cops, he's like, no more searches and no more, you know, police, overarching police presence. And, you know, you can't, when he gets pulled over by the cop.
Right.
On its face, you're like, well, yeah, like,
makes sense.
that makes sense. But they take that kernel of like, oh yeah, and turn it into, well, now you're using that, like, your law that you believe now, because you've taken this law, it's the Constitution of the United States, it's the Constitution, and now you've taken it and gone, well, now you're changing it to your law is the Constitution. And your law is what everybody should follow, and your law is how they should live, and your. It breaks it down into this place where it's very dangerous if you allow people to feel that way and think that way, that their laws in their specific religions override the laws that we have in our Constitution, which is why it's very important to me to always, you know, look at when you're talking about laws and changing things that are societally large, that, you know, there's a way to do that, and the Constitution's there. You can change it. You know, it's not immovable. It is a amorphous document. It can be changed. So it's important to live by the law but in not at the same time, you can't make up your own laws and then go live by them. So there's obviously parallels between today with that kind of stuff, but at the same time, like we're not caning. No senators have been caned yet on the floor of the House or the Senate. So it's like I guess we're still a little bit further away from like the caning of Sumner, but there's lots of places you can back into history and go, laws of the land and laws of people's values were mixed in certain ways that never ended up very good.
Yeah. Well, Wyatt, this has been a tremendous conversation. Clearly, this character you've really dug into it and you really understand it. It's been a very insightful discussion about Dan Lafferty and Under the Banner of Heaven. I just have to ask one more question. When are we going to see U.S. Agent again?
I don't know. I hope soon. I always say, like, if Marvel calls and you pick up the phone and it's like, all right, they're great to work with. The collaborative experience I had last time was so really, really, really wonderful. All the actors were amazing. It's like, it's a cushy job for the most part. You got to get into shape and you got to wear a ridiculous suit around all day where it's like, hopefully you don't shoot in the summer because those suits are about 8,000 degrees and 400 pounds. So those are the only two things where you're like, hopefully not in the summer, and like hopefully there's a way to get some air conditioning into my suit. But yeah, I'm waiting for the phone call.
Nice. Well, I'm waiting to see it, but brilliant performances both in Falcon and the Winter Soldier and of course this year's Under the Banner of Heaven. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Take care.
See ya.